A young woman mysteriously disappears just 2 days before her 22nd birthday. From the first hour of the investigation, police are confronted with a series of strange clues, signs that indicate not only a routine disappearance, but also a possible horrific tragedy. Although these signs raise alarm bells, searching for the truth takes over a decade. It takes 12 years for the secret to be revealed, but the truth is so heartbreaking that it has shocked the nation, once again shining a light on the tragic story of Caitlin Markham. Caitlin was born into a loving family in Fairfield, Ohio, on January 16, 1989. She grew up with her parents and younger sister, surrounded by friends and relatives who loved her. From a young age, Caitlin stood out for her fantastic ability to connect, a talent that allowed her to bridge the gap between strangers easily. She could approach the shyest kids on the playground and have them laughing and playing with her in a heartbeat. But Caitlin also had an artistic soul and an endless passion for the arts. From singing and painting to other creative activities, everything related to art fascinated her. This shaped Caitlin's future path. After graduating from high school, she decided to pursue graphic design at a local university, a choice that reflected her passion and innate talent. The summer of 2011 marked a significant turning point in Caitlin's life. She was preparing for her final exams while planning to move to Colorado with her fiancé, John, whom she had been dating for 6 years. The two got engaged a year ago, and now they were dreaming of a new life together in a foreign city, building a future and preparing for their dream wedding. However, that dream was suddenly shattered on August 14th, the fateful day that changed everything. That morning, Caitlin was scheduled to work a shift at the bridal shop, where she worked part-time but never showed up. When calls and messages from family and friends went unanswered, everyone began to worry. This was completely different from Caitlin, who always kept in touch and was responsible for her work. At first, the family thought she might be busy with someone, but their fears grew as the night fell, and there was still no news from Caitlin. Caitlin's fiancé, John, decided to go to her apartment after work to check on her. Caitlin's car was still parked in front of the small apartment complex where she lived, but the door was unlocked when John entered. The apartment looked utterly normal. Caitlin's dog was lying quietly in the corner, but her owner was nowhere to be found. What was even stranger was that Caitlin's keys, wallet, and identification were all found in the house. Why hadn't she taken these essentials with her if she had left alone? This immediately raised suspicions in John and the police when he called to report her missing. John recounted that the last time he had seen Caitlin was the night before. They had stayed at her house with a mutual friend. After the friend left, Caitlin decided not to go out because it was late, and John went to his mother's house. They texted several times that night, but the conversation ended when Caitlin suddenly stopped responding. This was entirely out of character because Caitlin always responded to his texts every morning, but not this time. When police arrived at the scene, they found no signs of forced entry or struggle. However, the fact that Caitlin had disappeared without any critical personal belongings led people to believe she had not left voluntarily. From that moment on, the story of Caitlin's disappearance became a mystery that shocked the entire community. Despite initial suspicions and clues, Caitlin's case fell into a deadlock, lingering for years without any answers. It was not until 12 years later, when the secret was finally revealed, that the painful truth shocked and outraged the whole country. Investigators quickly began interviewing Caitlin's friends and family for clues, but none of them had heard from her since the night before. Everyone insisted that Caitlin was not the type of person who would suddenly leave without saying a word. That was contrary to her personality, a careful, thoughtful person who always put her family and friends first. Moreover, Caitlin was very focused on her final exams, and her 22nd birthday was just a few days away. She had planned an intimate birthday party at a local restaurant, where she planned to spend time with her loved ones. With this information, the police began to suspect that something serious might have happened to Caitlin. A large-scale search operation was quickly launched. Over 100 volunteers were recruited and divided into small groups to search the city, from parks to abandoned areas to deserted streets. Caitlin's family and friends were also involved. They prepared hundreds of flyers with Caitlin's complete information, photos, and detailed descriptions, then posted and distributed them in neighborhoods, restaurants, bus stations, and anywhere else they could find. Meanwhile, detectives began investigating, trying to find any clues, no matter how small. Caitlin's fiancé, John, was one of the first to be questioned. On the first day, the police noticed minor scratches on his neck. When questioned, John explained that he had accidentally scratched himself while shaving. However, the detectives still decided to ask him to take a voice stress test, a method of analyzing recorded responses to find signs of deception. The results of this test were inconclusive. Detectives could not determine whether John was trying to hide something or was too concerned about his fiancée's mysterious disappearance. However, what set John apart was his cooperative attitude from the start. He actively participated in the search efforts, answered every question from the police without hesitation, and even agreed to several interviews with local news outlets as Caitlin's story spread. These actions caused investigators to scrutinize John's details to ensure they had not overlooked anything. When investigators checked John's alibi, they confirmed that on the night Caitlin went missing, he attended a party with friends and returned home afterward. Data from his laptop showed that he had been watching a movie at home, which matched his testimony. In addition, the mutual friend who visited Caitlin and John that night confirmed that he had seen them at Caitlin's house. Although all the evidence seemed to prove that John was innocent, the detectives could not completely rule out the possibility of his involvement. However, with the current information, they did not have enough basis to charge him. Instead, their attention turned to searching for other clues, details that could explain Caitlin's strange disappearance. Meanwhile, time continued to pass, and the hope of finding Caitlin safe and sound became increasingly slim. Her loved ones continued to pray and hope, but a sense of helplessness and despair gradually enveloped everyone. Caitlin's disappearance was not only a mystery, but also a story that shook the entire Fairfield community. John told police they had talked that evening about Caitlin's plans to move to Colorado and her final exams, but he noticed she seemed quieter than usual. Caitlin spent most of the evening studying on her laptop, seemingly stressed by the pressure of the upcoming exams. With the exams just weeks away, John thought Caitlin's silence was nothing to worry about, simply because she was concentrating. His statements, combined with the fact that there was no clear evidence against him, led police to conclude that the likelihood of John's involvement in the disappearance was very low. As a result, investigators turned their attention to other leads. Police then searched Caitlin's phone and found that the device had been turned off at 12:06 a.m. the next day. Notably, about half an hour before the phone was turned off, Caitlin had sent John a photo via text message. This matched his testimony, lending credence to John's story. However, Caitlin's device had no further activity after that point. This was an important finding, but it did not bring investigators closer to locating her. Not giving up, the police decided to intensify their search efforts. They mobilized dozens of volunteers and expanded the search area further. National media attention began to pour into the case, prompting hundreds of people in the area to join in. Flyers with Caitlin's information and photos were distributed everywhere, from residential areas and parks to bus stops. Search teams scoured every nook and cranny, from dense forests and nearby lakes to abandoned buildings. But after days of hard work, they still couldn't find any trace. During this time, John was constantly involved in the search operations. He worked closely with the police, helped organize volunteer teams, and answered many questions from the media. However, as time passed without any progress, the town began to question his role in the disappearance. Rumors spread that John might have staged everything to hide some terrible secret. When these rumors reached his ears, John said in an interview, "All I want is to bring Caitlin home. I don't care about baseless accusations. The only thing I'm focused on right now is finding her." However, despite John's cooperation and the tireless efforts of the police and volunteers, things still came to a standstill. No new clues emerged, and time passed, leaving behind the painful question that no one could answer. Where was Caitlin? And what happened that fateful night? Investigators quickly made it clear that they had no reason to suspect John. His alibi was established, and he did not hesitate to allow the police to search his home without a warrant. John was fully cooperative throughout the investigation and willing to comply with any requests. However, he admitted that the public's accusations sometimes frustrated him. Once, while posting flyers for Caitlin on the street, a woman approached him, started talking about the case, and bluntly stated that her boyfriend must have done it, not realizing that she was speaking directly to him. The search for Caitlin continued for months. However, when no leads were found despite their best efforts, the police were forced to stop the extensive search operations, focus on the investigation, and wait for any new leads. By this time, Caitlin's case had attracted much public attention. The government was offering a reward of up to $50,000 for any information that would help, but even with hundreds of tips coming in, not a single lead had brought police any closer to finding Caitlin. A surprising twist came nearly a year later. Police in Miami arrested a 28-year-old man for assaulting a college student. At first, the case did not appear to be connected to Caitlin. But when investigators discovered that the man had lived across the street from Caitlin's apartment complex at the time of her disappearance, they decided to question him. Detectives traveled to Miami and thoroughly investigated the man's whereabouts and movements on the night Caitlin disappeared. However, after a detailed investigation, they concluded that he had no opportunity to commit the crime and ruled him out as a suspect. The case went cold for another year until April 10, 2013. On that day, a Cedar Lake, Indiana, man was searching for scrap metal along a road near a wooded area when he discovered a strange bundle of black tar. Upon inspection, he was horrified to find that it contained human bones. He immediately called the police. At the scene, police discovered another bag containing a skull. Forensic experts quickly confirmed that the remains were human and used dental records to identify the victim. The results showed that the victim was Caitlin. The discovery confirmed that Caitlin had been dead for a long time. Investigators believed it was a homicide, as the body had been dismembered and transported to another state. Notably, the killer did not bury the body. It was simply dumped next to a pile of trash. Due to the advanced state of decomposition, forensic experts were unable to determine the exact cause of death. Still, they found a stab wound on the humerus, supporting the theory that Caitlin was murdered. The case was further complicated when the remains were discovered in Indiana, prompting police from both states to join forces. Despite their joint efforts, the investigation has not made significant progress, and the question of who killed Caitlin remains a mystery. Investigators concluded that Caitlin's body had likely been stored elsewhere before being moved to the woods where it was found. It appears that the killer feared the body would be discovered, so he decided to move the remains to a more remote location to create a false sense of security. In 2015, Caitlin's father hired a private investigator after feeling that the local police were not doing enough to solve the case. The detective began his investigation, speaking with Caitlin's relatives and friends, and eventually identified 2 potential suspects. However, when he forwarded this information to the police, they chose not to publicize their findings. That same year, the reward for any information leading to the discovery was increased to $75,000, but this still did not lead to any progress. Caitlin's father did not give up and fought to transfer the case from the local police to the county. Finally, in late 2015, he succeeded, and a new team of detectives took over the case, starting the investigation from scratch. By 2016, detectives announced they had a prime suspect in Caitlin's case, but there was not enough evidence to take action. For this reason, they did not reveal the suspect's identity, and the investigation stalled for years. In 2018, police in a town near Caitlin's home discovered the body of another young woman. The crime bore striking similarities to Caitlin's, leading investigators to theorize a potential connection. They soon identified a suspect named Michael, who was believed to have stalked the victim for weeks before the attack. While investigating Michael, investigators discovered a shocking detail. In a music festival photo, Michael was standing next to Caitlin's fiancé, John. When questioned, John admitted that he had met Michael at the festival, but claimed they had barely interacted. However, investigators found no further connection between Michael and Caitlin, eliminating this theory. The silence continued until 2023, when investigators unexpectedly announced the first arrest concerning Caitlin's case. A man named Jonathan, a close friend of both Caitlin and John, was arrested. This caused a stir, but just 2 months later the case took a shocking turn. The police arrested Caitlin's fiancé, John, on murder charges. After John's arrest, investigators released the information gathered throughout the investigation. When the case was transferred to the district attorney's office, new detectives reviewed all the evidence and immediately found John's behavior suspicious. In particular, his 911 call sounded prepared, with his phrasing sounding like he was reading from a script. Likewise, his initial statements to the patrol officers were also unusual. Investigators continued to review recordings of conversations between John and his mutual friends with Caitlin, opening up a host of new details that could lead to the truth behind the young girl's tragic death. Several of Caitlin's friends have provided disturbing observations about her relationship with John in the months leading up to her disappearance. According to their accounts, Caitlin expressed that her relationship with her fiancé had become increasingly strained. She even considered breaking up with him. Caitlin shared that John had begun using drugs, had become more aggressive, and had engaged in unhealthy behavior, including frequent viewing of adult content of a disturbing nature. These issues were of great concern to Caitlin's friends, but no one expected the tragedy to come. Adding to the complexity of the case were witness statements, which had been in police hands since 2011. On the night of Caitlin's disappearance, 2 teenagers had snuck out around 2 a.m. to attend a party. As they passed John's mother's house, they noticed 2 cars parked outside with their headlights off. According to their accounts, John got out of one of the cars, went into the house, and returned just a few minutes before getting into the driver's seat. Both cars then drove away, still without their lights on. These details contradicted John's testimony, who claimed he was at home watching a movie that night. When investigators looked more closely at John's alibi, they found it shaky. The only evidence John provided was browser tabs on his laptop, which showed he was watching a movie. However, there was no evidence that John was at home then. On the contrary, the testimony of 2 witnesses suggested that he was elsewhere under suspicious circumstances. Additionally, John's behavior on the night of Caitlin's disappearance raised suspicions. His phone had been turned off just 2 minutes before Caitlin's phone stopped working, and it had not been turned back on for the next 15 hours. In addition, John deleted some of the messages he sent Caitlin that night, leaving their contents a mystery. This further complicated the situation. Initially, John claimed that Caitlin did not reply to his good morning message the next day. However, he later changed his story, revealing that he had never sent such a message. These details have led investigators to look closely at John's behavior and the truth behind his statements. Circumstantial evidence, from witness statements to phone records, seems to not only call John's alibi into question, but also open up the possibility that he may have played a role in Caitlin's disappearance. However, to this point, the police have not yet had enough direct evidence to charge him, and the case continues to be shrouded in mystery. Another interesting detail in the case comes from the testimony of neighbors living near Caitlin's apartment. According to the initial account, they heard unusual noises on the night Caitlin went missing. Specifically, there was a loud argument, a banging on the door, and a whispering voice, repeatedly repeating the word "no." However, John denied any argument between him and Caitlin that night. The initial investigation team did not take this detail seriously or investigate further. After reviewing all the information and evidence, the current detectives concluded that John was the prime suspect. Still, they needed more direct evidence to charge him. During the reinvestigation, the detectives interviewed Caitlin's friends, leading to a surprising discovery. A female friend of Caitlin revealed that just a few months after her disappearance, John confessed that he had romantic feelings for this friend. This shocked her greatly, especially since, at that time, John was still actively involved in the search for Caitlin, often expressing that he missed her very much and was heartbroken over her disappearance. The detectives also decided to re-interview all relevant witnesses and obtained a search warrant for John's mother's house, where he lived at the time of Caitlin's disappearance. There, they discovered a black tarp identical to the one found covering Caitlin's body. Additionally, in John's room, they found several poems written by him, including one particularly disturbing poem. The poem contained a haunting internal dialogue. "I loved her. I had to kill her. But I loved her. She had to die." These words made the detectives unable to help but suspect John's connection to Caitlin's death. Detectives also discovered that John had remarried and had a family by then. However, he was often aggressive toward his new wife. A video of John screaming at his wife while holding their young daughter in the yard was collected by police as evidence of his violent personality. Detectives eventually determined that the location where Caitlin's remains were found was along the route to John's father's farm, a place he frequented. This further strengthened the theory that John was familiar with the area and may have chosen this location to dispose of the body. With all the suspicious and contradictory details, detectives decided to confront John directly. However, when questioned, he denied any involvement in the murder. When the detectives pointed out the evidence and contradictions, John calmly replied that it was just unfortunate coincidences. Unfortunately, he was right. Investigators knew that despite the many suspicious details, the evidence could not convict him with certainty. However, a small gap in John's story gave detectives an opportunity. Based on the witness's statement that he left the house at 2 a.m., the police decided to arrest John for making a false statement, hoping this would open the door to finding more evidence. Another complication arose when witnesses reported that John was not alone on the night of Caitlin's disappearance. Another car had pulled up alongside him. Based on this information, detectives began focusing on John's close friend, Jonathan, with a suspicion that he might be in the other car. Upon further investigation, they discovered that Jonathan was also in a group photo at the music festival with John and Michael, a convicted murderer in another case of a young woman. This made Jonathan a person of interest to investigate. Detectives reviewed all of Jonathan's previous conversations with police. Based on the new findings, they decided to arrest him in February 2024 on a charge of making a false statement. However, specific details regarding the arrest were not disclosed. 2 months later, they took the bold step of arresting Caitlin's fiancé, John, in the hope that he would confess or provide more information. Investigators believed that John did not act alone and that someone else helped him dispose of the body, but both John and Jonathan continued to deny any involvement in the murder. Despite his arrest, John posted $1 million bail to await trial. However, prosecutors realized that with the circumstantial and shaky evidence, a jury trial would likely result in John's acquittal. So they decided to strike a deal. John would plead guilty to third-degree murder in exchange for a reduced sentence and a public trial. The deal did not require him to provide any details about the case. In June 2024, John appeared in court, pleading guilty to murder but refusing to provide any further information about the truth behind the case. Under the terms of the plea deal, the judge imposed the maximum sentence for third-degree murder in Ohio, just 3 years in prison. The ruling immediately sparked outrage across the country. Not only was the sentence too lenient, but the nature of the case remained a mystery, with significant questions still unanswered. As for Jonathan, all charges against him were dropped because investigators could not find evidence that he was involved in disposing of the body. Jonathan was released without any legal responsibility. After the verdict, Caitlin's father expressed deep disappointment. He said that what hurt him most was not John's lenient sentence, but the fact that he would never know the whole truth about what happened to his daughter. For him, true justice is not about how long John spends in prison, but about all those involved facing the consequences of their actions and the truth being revealed. With a 3-year sentence and no testimony from John, the case was controversially closed, leaving Caitlin's family and the entire community in a state of anger and grief. After the verdict, a heartbreaking truth was revealed. Caitlin's parents admitted that, at first, they suspected John of being involved in their daughter's disappearance, but they tried to hold out hope that he was innocent. However, as time went on, the evidence piled up, and they were forced to confront the possibility that John was responsible for Caitlin's death. What hurt them most was that John continued to stay in touch with them over the years, even hugging them at Caitlin's funeral, all while he was the one who took her life. Shortly after John was incarcerated, a fellow inmate contacted the police, claiming that John had confessed to some details of the murder. According to this inmate, John and Caitlin had gotten into a heated argument on that fateful night. John lost control, attacked, and strangled Caitlin to death. He then panicked and considered calling the police but feared the consequences. Instead, John considered staging the crime scene as a suicide but ultimately decided to dispose of the body. Detectives, however, remained cautious about this account. They suspected that John might have told a story that fit the evidence, but whether it was true remained an open question. Some detectives even believed that the murder was not the result of a spontaneous act of anger, but may have been premeditated. One of the detectives who interviewed John described him as a psychopath, unlike any other criminal he had encountered. He was very frightening, he said, not just because of what he did, but because of how calmly he described it. It was like he was talking about something completely normal. The verdict was in, though, and there was no way to change it. John, now 35, will serve just 3 years in prison and is scheduled to be released in 2027 when he will be 39. Caitlin's parents admit they have given up the hope of knowing the whole truth. Even if John confesses, they still think it will be difficult to believe him after all the conflicts and cover-ups over the years. What scares them most is that John will be released and returned to society, where he is still capable of causing harm. Meanwhile, police continue to investigate a potential connection between John, Jonathan, and Michael, a convicted murderer in another case. They suspect that the trio may have bonded over their bizarre fantasies and shared violent tendencies. However, so far, there is no evidence to support this theory. Caitlin's case ended with so many unanswered questions, leaving behind pain and anger in the hearts of her family, friends, and community. Will the truth behind Caitlin's death ever be fully revealed, or will it forever be buried in the darkness of lies?